Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wheel Talk. I'm Brian. This is my husband, Patrick.
Do you get that clean where I'm not interrupting you?
Should we do it again?
Yeah, do it clean.
I'm Brian. I have not read...
Wait, I was talking still. Sorry.
Okay. I'm Brian. I have read the Wheel of Time books. This is my husband, Patrick. He has not read the Wheel of Time. Episode 5 is about to drop, but before it does, I wanted to take a second to talk to you about your perspective of Episode 4. We're a little behind on the channel. We're catching up, so before we get to Episode 5, let's just talk Episode 4. We're gonna talk specifics about this episode. Before we do, when this episode dropped, like as soon as this episode dropped, your dad called us to say that he had watched it before I did, which I'm obsessed. So I love that my father-in-law watched it before me. He said this was by far my favorite episode. And since then, a lot of Wheel of Time fans have said the same thing. They feel like this is their favorite episode so far. I think you said that too. So I'm curious to ask from a non-reader's perspective, why do you think this episode is so beloved? Why do you think this is so many people's favorite episode?
I don't want to speak for everybody, but I liked it because a lot happened. The last several episodes were moving chess pieces into place to set up this sort of big move that they were making in this one. Like, we got to see the stuff with Logain, which was really super cool. We got peeks at the world beyond, like, this little forest valley. It's true. We got to see...
Yeah, it's just funny.
We got to see other Aes Sedai that, like, they aren't this sort of monolithic group, but rather have internal factions with disagreements and sort of that whole thing we got. It just sort of broadened the world in a way that the others hadn't quite accomplished yet.
Yeah, I think that's right. For me, this episode was particularly exciting because of the male channeling. I keep going back to that Leandrin prologue in episode 1, where I think there were some things that were confusing, and I think this episode gave us what that prologue didn't. We got to actually see what male channeling means. Everything about it that we didn't get to see in that prologue, I almost, and this isn't a spoiler, I wish they had opened episode 1 with that opening in Geldon in episode 4.
100%. It would have done so much to, like, ground us in this idea of dragons and false dragons and, like, set up this sort of threat that faces the Aes Sedai and our heroes. I think it would have been done much better to sort of ground us in the world than the original opening did.
Yeah, I agree. I think that first opening was like trying to set up the idea of male channelers, but then it kind of fell short because we didn't see any male channeling. And this episode was like, yes, that's the conflict, that's the world. I was excited to see that. Kind of wish it had come sooner, but I think that's a big reason of why this episode feels like a big deal. Mm-hmm. I loved it. I love Logain.
I'm sorry to see him go.
How'd you feel about Thom fighting that Fade?
It was cool. Like, I don't know. I feel like there's a lot you've just loaded in that question about...
Well, you commented when we were watching. First time we watched, you were like, go Thom. And I loved hearing you say that.
This is the episode 2 where he, like, kind of introduces the idea of Gleeman as more than they appear to be.
Yes.
Which I thought was really cool. In my mind, before I saw the show, in my mind, Gleeman were always these, like Sir Robin's minstrels. in Monty Python.
Brave Sir Robin.
Yeah, they were they sing songs and wear funny shoes and dance about. And like before, I was really excited to see Gleeman because I think they're going to be really silly and fun. And this makes them like a spy network of Han Solos. They are like these sort of like agents that travel around and collect information and kick ass and all that kind of stuff. And while it's not what I thought a Gleeman was going to be, I don't hate it. I think it's pretty cool that like they are these like hyper competent spies that disguise themselves as kind of wandering singers.
Yeah, I loved what he said about we give ourselves a silly name because it throws people off, but there's nothing more dangerous than a man who knows the past.
I mean, it threw me off. I was thinking they had bells on their hats.
Maybe they should.
Yeah.
While you were looking at the comments on a video of mine, you asked, wait a minute, Thom's name is spelled with an H?
I have a lot to say about this. This is because it's wrong. Because it's wrong.
But real quick before I forget, I said, well, yeah, it's spelled Thom, but it's short for Thom Drill.
That doesn't make it better. That doesn't make it better. Thom in our world is short for Thomas, which is also spelled with an H, but we don't include it when we shorten it to Thom. So saying it's Thomawakin or Tom to talk Tom, like it doesn't matter because we're shortening it to Thom, which doesn't need the silent H. Where the point is to make it shorter. So let's get rid of the extraneous part. We can get rid of the drill and the H. It doesn't need to be there.
So you're not a fan of the spelling of Thom's name?
It's ridiculous and indulgent, and I hate it.
Okay.
That's what I have to say.
Okay. I love it. All right. This is what I really want to talk to you about because you brought some really interesting points up, some things that I didn't notice. Let's talk about the battle with Logain and the weaves and who can see the weaves.
Okay, so this actually, okay, I'm just going to talk for a minute and you all can like tell me if I'm wrong or not.
I think this is fascinating.
I'm going to speak my truth.
Yeah.
So this episode, in my understanding, established that not everyone can see the weaves. Just because you can see some weaves doesn't mean you can see all weaves. They're in the cave and they're like, look, we knew we can't see Min's weaves, but it looks like he's just sitting there doing nothing when really he's doing epic battles with us. And to me, that makes a lot of sense. It goes a long way to explain the prologue where she's just like holding out her hand and rocks fall.
We saw no weaves.
There's no weaves there. And it's like, oh, because that's showing us from an objective perspective what it would just look like. It just looks like they hold out their wave their hands around and things happen.
If you're not someone who can channel, that's what you're seeing.
Correct.
Right.
What frustrated me a little bit is they show us that in the prologue, but then they never show us that sort of objective perspective again, or at least they haven't yet, of like, even when one of the Green's warders, the like bearded blonde guy, comes into the cave. Sure. And they like, the camera is literally showing us his perspective. Like the camera is sitting on his shoulder and we're seeing into the cave and we can see all the weaves going. We can see the weaves of them and the weaves of Logain. Like we can see it all, which makes you think that like he can see it. And then we get to, so like when he takes those axes and like plunges them into the cocoon, it's like that's a stupid thing for him to do. Like why would you purposely break their cocoon around Logain?
He can't see it.
The answer is he can't see it.
But
however, and this is where I was like, oh, this is a mistake in the filmmaking. Logain, they clearly say in the beginning that they cannot see Logain's weaves. I read the comments on YouTube, you guys. I read the comments on the last video where you're all like, well, in chapter 16 of The Magic of the Well, it clearly states in paragraph 4 that this one... No, I read that stuff and you're wrong. They say in the show, we can't see his weaves. And then they show where Logain is shooting...
This is the first time it happens, is with Corinne, Leandrin, and Moiraine are lined up.
They're lined up. What's her name? Corinne?
Corenne, Leandrin, and Moiraine.
Corinne.
Yes.
So he's beginning to shoot his shadow daggers, and Corinne sees the shadow daggers and, like, throws magic, but forgets to throw them in front of herself for some reason. But she, like, protects the other two and gets stabbed. And I said, Brian, how can...
He made me pause it so we could talk about this.
I was like, what is she looking at? Because she can't see... Like, how does she see the shadow daggers coming? Because she cannot see his weaves. And... So
it's a good point. I mean, look, the books, we can't go to the books to say that that's how they're justifying the show. The show is its own thing. Mm-hmm. I think you bring up a great point, though, that they talk about it as if they can't see his weaves. When Moiraine takes over Leandrin's shield, it's this thing of you can feel his power. They say something that implies that you can't see the weaves.
Yeah, no, they definitely talk about that.
Yeah.
You can't see it.
You bring up a great point. I remember we paused it, and you brought that up, and I was like, you're right. She shouldn't be able to see the weaves. And I wasn't thinking about that because watching the show, we can all see the weaves. Mm-hmm. And it just feels like I'm sort of separating my book brain from my show brain. It was like, oh yeah, I guess everyone can just see it. And then you asked that question and I was like, I don't know. I don't know why she can see what he's about to do. I don't know.
I mean, is that a thing in the books where like, you can't see the weaves except shadow daggers?
No, but maybe on the show. That was a great point, though, because I hadn't thought about it. I was thinking about so many other things related to the books that when you said that, I was like, oh yeah, Corinne shouldn't be able to see those shadow daggers. Also, why didn't she just spread that wall to protect all three of them?
I think that is because we had to do a thing. Like, I think that's just a she.
Interesting question. I thought that was a really good point.
She was weakened by putting the force on the bad guy and only had enough magic for 2 shields.
So she saved Leandrin instead of herself? I mean, yeah, but...
Narratively, she needed to die if that's, like, the whole... Like, if that... It's, right. If narratively we needed to get her out of the picture.
But as far as the fact that she seemed to see these things coming at her, that the other two either didn't or just weren't fast enough, it was like, But you said in this episode that they can't see that stuff. So I thought that was a really interesting point.
Well, it just, when they said they couldn't see it, I was like, oh, that's why we didn't see it in the prologue. Because we were getting an objective view. But then we never get that objective view again.
And like you said, when, I believe it's Stepan, is Karene's warder who comes charging in, breaks the shield with his axe.
That only makes sense if he can't see it.
Why wasn't it would have, you brought this up and I was like, you're right. If there had been one shot when he comes in and we don't see the weaves, we see it from Stepan's perspective, and then they can show us the weaves. But like, we have to see that from his perspective, he's not seeing it. And I don't think that's been clear on the show.
Like, on the one hand, I understand if I'm like making this show, there's this concept of who can see it and who can't. It could quickly become confusing for an audience member to see these things coming in and out. But I also think that is a wonderful opportunity to do some really cool creative stuff with when you show it and when you don't. Because imagine that moment, he runs into the cave and he just sees some women standing there staring at a guy on the ground, takes his axes and does it, and it's only then that we see it. We shift perspective and we see this massive amount of power they're flowing into this guy and all of that cool stuff.
Yeah, off of the thing of like, you know, they're making a show and the easiest thing is to show it. I get that, but I agree completely that giving us one instance where we see it from his perspective and we see that he doesn't see the weaves, and then we can cut back to what's actually happening. I think that would make such a difference in the clarity of who can see what.
Even if you kind of ease us into it by showing it to us earlier, either in Logain's battle with the king of Geldon, we see like when the dagger is like about to go into him, and Logain like grabs it with a shadow tentacle. Get a shot from the king's perspective where his hand is just frozen, and then the camera pans behind Tim or some other narrative trick to let us know that we're seeing from Logain's perspective to see the shadow magic at play there. Like that would be
something that would be helpful
and clue us in that.
A clear choice of shifting POVs to like even for a second, just so that we see that this isn't what everyone's seeing, right?
And it's such a cool concept. The fact that there's this thing going on that certain people can see and other people can't. Yeah. That like can set up so many cool games with the audience in terms of like what we're perceiving, like whose perspective. And like I read in the comments, there's a lot of, you all say that there's a lot of themes about perspective and who knows what and unreliable narrators. And I think beginning to weave that into the story through like literally the weaves, like can we trust what we're seeing as a fun game rather than just a sort of screw you to the audience or whatever. Yeah.
I really think they could do it with just like one instance. I mean, per episode maybe, but just like show us a second of someone else looking at what's going on and not seeing the weaves and then cutting back. It would make a big difference as far as like the warders can't see the weaves. This is not what everyone is seeing. It would have been cool.
We're spending a lot of time talking about this one little very tiny nitpicky thing.
Yeah.
It's really cool. Like
it is cool.
The episode was my favorite one so far.
Absolutely.
It was very, like the whole stuff was really cool. I loved Moiraine and Logain's dynamic. It was just fun.
I loved Moiraine talking to Logain. Final thing I want to ask you about. Let's talk about Nynaeve healing everyone in the room. Mm-hmm. I want to know what you thought of Nynaeve's first moment of channeling and how that all went down.
Yeah, so to me, what it did was it like explained like why we listened to the whole thing about Manetheren. I love that because sure maybe there's something later on where Manetheren becomes really important, and I've gathered from like the Lego video and just general conversation that like people love the story of Manetheren and that it's just this famous piece from the books, the story of Manetheren.
It's iconic.
But it didn't really have anything to do with anything. Like I guess it informs us that like our heroes don't know their own history, which is sort of interesting, but it doesn't, like they don't really take anything from it. They don't really grow from, like it's just this like, we're on a horseback ride and we get to hear this history lesson about this thing that happened a very long time ago, but isn't really germane to the plot. And so I was like, I guess they put that in there because people in the book love it, but I don't know what it's really doing. And then when Nynaeve does this, I remembered, the whole story of Manetheren ends with huge emotional distress, grabbing hold of the one power and forcing out this enormous effect, basically ending a battle that was long hopeless and just destroying everyone in her path. And herself even too, but that like when a woman is in this sort of hyper intense emotional state, they can have the capability to grab hold of the one power and do absolutely impossible things, even if they aren't Aes Sedai or trained in weaving or even know what it, like she may have had no concept of what the weave was or anything, the one power was or anything like that. Because they set that up several episodes before, when Nynaeve had that moment of this sort of everyone she's with is dead, and this person who she's beginning to develop feelings for is lying there with his throat open and it is actively dying. The fact that she's having this emotional moment and is able to grab hold of the one power and do the one thing that she does and is so core to her being, which is help and heal others, and use the one power to just innately do that, to me, both like it establishes why that Manetheren story was told, because we're preparing us for the idea of this is a thing that can happen. On rare occasions, but also gives us deep insight into Nynaeve herself. Healing is so innate to who she is. As a wisdom that that's what her role in that community is. She is the healer. She is the sort of wise woman of that community. She is a helper. In a moment of distress, her grasping of the one power was not destructive, but rather healing, I think was also very informative. So I really liked that moment.
I loved what you said about that, because I hadn't thought of it that way. Eldraine is the Queen of Manetheren.
Sure.
And when you pitched this as kind of Nynaeve's Eldraine moment, I was like, I hadn't thought about that. I don't usually associate Nynaeve with Eldraine. Hearing you say that was really interesting, because I was like, yeah, that it does tie to Manetheren. And I thought that was a really beautiful interpretation, that was kind of the point of hearing the Manetheren story, to see that, like, this is a part of Nynaeve.
Well, and yes, that Nynaeve is well, I mean, Nynaeve was brought to that village, but I assume she was brought to that village from somewhere else in the Two Rivers. I mean, you all will probably know better, but the idea that, like, from my mind, because she comes from that Two Rivers area, she is also a descendant of the Manetheren people. What it kind of showed me is to look for other echoes of Manetheren. So, like, Nynaeve has this Queen Eldraine moment. Our heroes might also have other echoes from that story that kind of feed through them and stuff. So it just, to me, it helped, like, I was like, oh, okay, so this is why we kind of, it's a cyclical thing. Like, and it ties into everything, like, you know, with the whole wheel concept. Yeah.
But it made Manetheren feel purposeful. It
was the first time where I was like, oh, this is why I'm glad I heard the stories, because it allows me to access this moment to understand, because otherwise I would have been like, this whole thing of, like, they study for years at the White Tower, why can she just do this thing all of a sudden? It's like, oh no, because we've heard that there is precedent for this, that this is a thing that can happen in these highly tense emotional moments.
Yeah. Yeah, and my other comments on that I have to save for my spoiler conversation. But yeah, I think that's really interesting. Anything else you want to say about episode 4?
It was really cool. I am so desperate for the gang to get back together.
Me too.
You know, I'm glad that
we feel that way reading the books. We're like, when are they
gonna get back together? I mean, like, I like the Tinkers. I hope we see the Tinkers again. I would love for other people to meet the Tinkers, because Perrin just does a lot of not answering when people ask him direct questions. Like, have you ever fought a battle? Silence. Have you ever used a sword or an axe?
I was
silent.
Like, sword, hammer, axe. Okay, yeah.
When you picked up that axe, did your life become better? Silent. Like, he's just incredibly rude to that old woman.
Perrin's a dick to Isla.
It's just like, and she's nothing but kind to him.
I loved their scene. I did love what she said about her daughter, and she's doing this for her daughter in her next life, in the next age. I thought that was beautiful.
Yeah, and I think that's cool too, to kind of set up that, like, in this world, the wheel is taken as fact across all cultures. Like this sort of theory of reincarnation isn't a religious belief as much as it is, like, just
everyone believes it.
And to the point to where, like, it's such a fact of the universe that different beliefs about the nature of the wheel have sprung up. The Two Rivers people do their little candle lighting thing. Tinkers have this whole song thing that they're going to come again with. Like, there's all these different, like, sort of cultural elements woven into this idea of the wheel, but nobody doubts the wheel, which I find interesting. It's not like Game of Thrones or our world, where there are all these religious traditions.
Well, Game of Thrones is a good comparison, where there are these gods and some people think it's bullshit.
Yeah, there's the old gods, the new gods, but then there's old continents where those gods have no, like, no one cares about what are they, the 5, the
7.
The 7. No one cares about the 7 on the eastern continents or whatever. That's just not a thing that's part of their worldview.
There's the 7 gods or the 2 gods.
The Lord, like, and even though those in that story, those gods have power, like, clearly something is happening with Melisandre and What's the guy who keeps coming back?
Beric Dondarrion?
Yes, Beric Dondarrion. Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he's clearly like he's a cleric of some sort of god or other. Whether or not that's an actual god or he's stepping into some sort of magic or whatever, clearly there is power at work here that they are ascribing religion to. But if you're outside of that culture, that means nothing to you. You don't really care about it.
It's honestly kind of the difference between a soft magic system and a hard magic system.
Sure, but what's just interesting to me about it is the sort of socio and religious element to it.
That no one, you never come across anyone who doesn't believe in the Wheel of Time.
Yeah, the wheel is just established that is just a part of this world, and how you think about the wheel or interface with the wheel or treat the wheel within your specific culture is very culture specific, but the wheel is a constant. I think is a very interesting thing about it. Raises a lot of questions in my mind, but I think not bad ones.
I agree. I actually, reading the books, no spoilers, but reading the books, that was always something I thought was fascinating, that people believe in the pattern and the wheel so much, and you never come across people, they think of it differently, they have different opinions, but you never come across non-believers when it comes to that.
Yeah, it's not
which
it's
is
not
foreign to our world.
Yeah, it's not a matter of belief, it's a matter of fact.
Like in our world, there would be a bunch of people who just didn't believe in it. But you don't see that in this
Like
story.
even Logain and Moraine's conversation about it, where he's like,
so
isn't this
good.
what the wheel wants us to do, is to learn and better ourselves in each incarnation? And she's like,
Love that.
no, bitch.
No, bitch!
No, it's
no,
like,
bitch!
the wheel's like a waterfall. Can't want anything.
I love, what do you want? I want you to understand that you're crazy.
Like, no, it's not. You're dumb. It's the wheel is just a thing. It's not. It doesn't want things.
It doesn't want anything. People want things.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. I loved that scene. All right. This was fun. Episode 5 is coming out very soon. Glad we did this just in the nick of time. We're catching up on this channel. Thank you for doing this.
I'm always happy to do this. This is fun.
Mwah. I love this. I love that he's watching the Wheel of Time. My husband's watching the Wheel of Time. All right. Walk in the lights.
And keep it wheel.
You're so good.
I know.
That was so good. All right. We're done. We're done. Get out. I've had enough.
Bye-bye.